The reading strategy that we're going to review today is asking questions. In my opinion, this is the number one strategy. If there's anything that you can take away from this course, it should be how to ask good questions, because asking questions is really what will help you think deeper about a text. So that's really our goal with this activity. Now, in general, there are good questions and there are bad questions. Bad questions aren't always bad, so we're going to call them less good. Okay? So really, really good, strong questions are going to have a few different components. They will be open-ended. That means that there is not a correct answer, which you'll see makes a question a little less good. They cannot be answered with yes, no, or maybe. When a question is answered with yes, no, or maybe, it doesn't really make you think a whole lot. The thinking is really pretty brief, pretty quick, and there's a finality to those where you ask the question, you think to yourself, yeah, and then you're done. So you're not really thinking in any sort of significant way. Also, it's not so good if a question can be answered in only a couple of words. So if those are yes, no, maybe, or something else that's maybe just a couple of words long, that's probably not our best question. We want to ask questions that people are interested in answering. This is really important when we start taking our questioning strategy out of just annotating a text and into having conversations with other people. You are used to seeing a lot of teacher questions, and teachers are boring. Don't be boring like we are. Ask interesting questions that you care about and that people would care to talk about. The question digs deeper than comprehension. So comprehension, which I've got listed down here at the very bottom, a comprehension question is one that helps you understand the text on a basic level. So teachers will ask a lot of these questions. When we think back to reading The Giver in quarter one, a comprehension question would be something like, what was Jonas's best friend's name? And the answer is Asher. So there's a correct answer. It's just sort of making sure that you understand what's going on. What is Jonas's job in The Giver? Well, it's to receive the memories of the community and hold those memories for them. So there's something where there's a correct answer. You could do the research and you could find that answer within a text, perhaps. So good questions are going to dig deeper than just the comprehension. They will focus on topics instead of the details. So in The Giver, some topics that we had were family, love, memory, community, all these really big abstract ideas. When we're asking questions, when we're looking at something like The Giver, we can say to ourselves, what really makes somebody family? Because in The Giver, they're not biologically related to each other. Is that what makes somebody family? We can ask a question like, are there certain memories we wouldn't mind giving up forever? We could ask ourselves, should we ever sacrifice our own happiness for our community? So those sorts of questions aren't asking specifics about The Giver, but instead focusing in on some ideas that The Giver introduces that apply to what's going on in The Giver, but also apply to our real life. So this is kind of more like thematic questioning, focusing in on those themes. And then finally, a really good question should be easily understood, particularly if you're using this question to engage in conversations with others. If your question is really lengthy or there are like 2 or 3 or 4 parts to it, people won't understand what you're saying. Coming back over here to bad questions or less good questions, if the answers are just opinions, then that's not really helping us understand something more. It's just presenting multiple opinions, not as good. If it's something about a story that's not important, so in The Giver, if we started fixating on the fact that we don't know if they eat meat or if they're all vegetarians, Does that seem really important overall to our story? No, not really. So we want to focus in on something that's important. A leading question is one in which you, in asking the question, are trying to get a certain answer. So if I said something along the lines of, we all love Jonas in The Giver, right? He's clearly our favorite character, right? I'm trying to lead you in a certain direction. That's not as good of a question. And then finally, kind of connecting to this point down here at the bottom, if it's too complex or confusing of a question, it's not really going to be our strongest one. Okay, so you can keep coming back to this list. This is a good general list when it comes to having discussions and when it comes to annotating a text. And I wanted to show you a couple of examples here of some questions that students have asked in the past to give you an idea of what some really good deeper level questions are. These questions were used for a discussion, so they were very aware that other people would be answering these questions as well. But obviously in asking these questions, they are also considering their answer. So let's look at this first one. How self-aware is David? So there's a character in this story who it's unclear whether or not he knows he is a robot. So how self-aware is he? I'm kind of trying to quantify on a spectrum how self-aware he is. What do you think David would be like without Teddy? So giving us a scenario where in the story one character has to survive without the other, what would that character be like? If the story were to continue, what do you think would happen to David? What would you do with David and or Teddy? I like this one a lot. Teddy says that nobody knows what the word real really means. What do you think Teddy's definition of real is? So as you can see, these won't be answered with yes or no. They're interesting questions. They definitely dig deeper than comprehension. You could not go through the text and find an answer within the text. A lot of it comes down to interpretation. But it's not just opinion-based either. I mean, you do need some support from the text as well. The big problem with asking questions tends to be the yes or no problem. You can have some really, really great ideas, but then accidentally phrase the question so that it's asked with yes or no as the answers in mind. So let's take a look at these. Do you think that David has feelings even though he was manufactured? Yes. Do you think Teddy knew that David was a robot? Yes. Do you think the little boy has feelings? Yes. So do you see how these are getting at some really good ideas, right? But ultimately, they're not having us dig deeply enough. These are the kinds of questions that when a teacher asks it, they have to say why or why not at the end so that you dig a little bit deeper. So we just want to avoid asking questions like this. Take, for instance, this one right here. Was David an intelligent being? We can rephrase that by instead saying something like, what makes someone or something intelligent? So that can't be answered with a yes or no, but it's getting at the same ideas. So sometimes we need to rephrase that. Now, for our purposes, when we're annotating a text, this is okay. It's allowed because you're starting to think about some of those bigger ideas. You just want to make sure that you really do kind of move it beyond just that yes or no response. So now, in looking at the questioning technique, I really think it just comes down to practice, that we need experience doing it. So I'm going to carry you through, we've been talking about The Giver a lot. It's good because it's a common text that we all have read. I'm going to read just this little section from chapter 15, and I'm going to carry you through some questions I'm coming up with in my mind. Okay, so chapter 15. Jonas entered the annex room and realized immediately that it was a day when he would be sent away. I'm wondering, what are the signs that he sees? The Giver was rigid in his chair, his face in his hands. I'm wondering if these are potential answers or if there's anything else going on. This also makes me think like a certain distinct kind of pain. So I'm wondering, why is he rigid? That would mean like stiff in his chair. So I'm going to start thinking of some potential answers. I mean, first of all, that sounds to me like he's in pain. Is he uncomfortable? Has he not been moving? So oftentimes when we ask these questions of ourselves in annotation, we want to kind of think of some of the answers and write those down while we're thinking about them as well. Jonas says here, I'll come back tomorrow, sir. And I'm wondering, why doesn't he wait? Why is he not waiting to see what the giver does or says to know that he's supposed to leave? Then he hesitates. What changed? Why did he hesitate in that moment? Unless maybe there's something I can do to help. Does he want the pain? Is he just curious? The giver looked up at him, his face contorted with suffering. Please, he gasps, take some of the pain. Again, here I'm wondering what changed, because he never did this in the past. And I'm even going to write that down because when we are annotating a text, remember, we want to track all of our thoughts. So if there are thoughts or ideas that you have that are connected to a particular question, write it down. Jonas helped him to his chair at the side of his bed. Then he quickly removed his tunic and lay face down. Put your hands on me, he directed, aware that in such anguish the giver might need reminding. Oh, I think my pen might have died. I'm going to have to start writing with my hands, and I'm sorry, it'll be messier. So he was in such anguish. The giver might need reminding. That sounds like a lot of pain. I'm wondering what's causing the pain. And if you remember, we do learn what's causing the pain, but we don't learn it yet. So that's a legitimate question to ask in those moments. The hands came and the pain came with them and through them. Jonas braced himself and entered the memory which was torturing the giver. So maybe in this moment, I'm pulling away from the plot of the story a little bit, and I'm asking, why did the author use this word? This is such an intense phrase, torture, that I'm wondering if that's maybe an indicator of sort of some foreshadowing happening here. He was in a confused, noisy, foul-smelling place. It was daylight, early morning, and the air was thick with smoke that hung, yellow and brown, above the ground. So already I'm asking myself, like, what is this setting? And we're going to have that answered, but that still means, or that doesn't mean that it's not a valuable question to ask in that moment. We want to start thinking about those things because it's helping us engage with the text, and it means that we're considering all of these possibilities as we read. Around him, everywhere, far across the expanse of what seemed to be a field, lay groaning men. A wild-eyed horse, its bridle torn and dangling, trotted frantically through the mounds of men, tossing its head, whinnying in panic. It stumbled finally, then fell, and did not rise. Did it die? So we're starting to get that this is the idea of war. So now I'm wondering, when was this? I'm wondering, why were they fighting? I apologize that my handwriting is always so bad, guys. That's why I'm saying the questions out loud, too. So if you take a look now, in this quick little passage, 6 paragraphs, I have asked let's choose a different color here so it stands out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 questions. This is something that eventually will hopefully just be happening in your head, but for now we can't trust that. So we need to write down all of these questions that we have to really make sure that we are engaging with the text and forcing ourselves to think deeply about what's happening. When you are reading, it shouldn't be passive. You should not just be sitting there and taking it in. Instead, it should be an active process. You should be actively thinking and engaging and working with the text to make meaning of it. So again, that's what the process looks like when you're annotating a text for questions. And I don't want you to forget that these good versus the less good questions, these will also play a role when we are having conversations with other people. So these questions can apply to your annotations, but more importantly, when we eventually take our annotations and start having conversations about the text, these are really important questions and strategies to be using to make those discussions more valuable.